tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody. I'm Jane Bryson, I'm the Dean of the Wellington School of Business and Government, or Oriki, here at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here this morning for the second in our series of Getting to a Fairer Future for All, Healthy, Wealthy and Wise. So today we're talking about the wealthy bit, how to get to a wealthier future for all, whatever that might mean. We will no doubt spike some debate about that this morning. We've got three wonderful speakers. So to talk about getting to a wealthier future for all, first of all we have Ganesh Nana, who is a high-profile economist who worked for Burl for 22 years and was a former chair of the Productivity Commission. He also, way back, was a lecturer here. It's really good to welcome you back, Ganesh, and we're looking forward to what you have to say. We also have Professor Lisa Marriott, who's Professor of Taxation here at the Wellington School of Business and Government, and is a Fellow of the Chartered Accountants of Australia and New Zealand, and has worked in industry as a financial controller and accountant in the UK and New Zealand, but she's been donkey deep in academia for the last 15 years. And last but not least, we have the Reverend Murray Eldridge. As you may well know, Murray is the Wellington City Missioner, a role he took on in 2018. I'd also add he's an alum of this faculty and this university, so it's really lovely to have you back, Murray. And he's worked with children and families throughout New Zealand for over 20 years in various roles, including as Chief Executive of Barnardos, New Zealand. So I'm hoping we get some interesting perspectives on getting to a wealthier future for all. So the process will be that I have two questions I'm posing. I will pose the first question and each speaker will get 8 minutes or thereabouts, depending on my timekeeping, to speak about it. And then I'll pose a second question and they'll get about 5 minutes. And then I'll open it up for general discussion. And I think I have some more slides, which I better show you. Yes. So the third in the Dean series, doing a bit of on-selling, is at the end of October, Wednesday the 30th in the morning, and that's on getting to a wiser future for all. So as you've attended today, you will definitely get the advertisement and ability to register for that final session. It has speakers Helmut Modlik, the Chief Executive of Ngāti Toa, and Professor Marcus Luxac-Roche, who is our Chair in Complexity Science here in the Business School, and a third secret speaker that I'm just confirming at the moment, but which will be revealed in the advertising. So hope we see you along at that one too. So we'll kick off with our speakers. Better get to my question. So in thinking about how to get to a wealthier future for all, the first question I posed, and it may be that they don't answer the question, it may be they go completely off-piste, but that's fine. But the first question I posed was, in your opinion, what does a wealthy future for all look like? And what are the 2 or 3 key challenges to achieving it? So we'll start with Ganesh. Oh, hang on.
Kia ora tātou. Whoops, is this on? Okay, put the sound of this on. Kia ora. Thank you, Jane, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invite. It's always great to come back to this august institution, although I was way up on that hill a long, long time ago. My name's Ganesh, and was an economist, still an economist, was chair of Productivity Commission and Burl and all of those sorts of stuff. But first generation New Zealander, born and bred just up the valley up there. parents who immigrated here from India about 70 odd years ago. Acknowledge Māori as tangata whare of Aotearoa, and acknowledge Ngāti Toa and Te Atiawa and Taranaki Whānui as mana whenua of this rohi. Wealthier future for all. Apologies, I'm probably going to go academic. One of the things is problem definition. And so there's some words in there that we've got to define. But first, did you all have a good breakfast? Yeah, great, awesome. Good night's sleep last night? Yeah? Warm, dry home? Roof over your head? Nice meal the night before? And you've all got a plan B to do it again tonight? You've got a plan B if everything falls apart? You've got somewhere else you could probably go and put your head down? No issues? By my definition, I would say you're all wealthy. You've all got a home to go to. You've all got food on the table. If things go belly up, you've probably got a plan B, whether it's your neighbour or your brother or uncle or mother or daughter or aunt or someone out there in the community to latch onto to put food on the table for you and give you a place to sleep and a roof over your head. If we all need a plan B, well, we're probably going to get all together and go down to the local school and the Civil Defence Emergency Unit or whatever it might be. I would probably say, from my perspective, that you're all wealthy. And to be honest, most of us are going to be wealthy into the future on that definition. But the first thing is, we've got to define what wealthy means, and you'll see from there that I'm not of the interest. Well, I am a little bit interested, but I'm not of the person that thinks wealthy is defined by dollars and cents. It's defined by those opportunities that we all had to set ourselves up to get us into this position now. And I just go back to my parents' life in coming here 70 odd years ago, and they are now, and would admit, that they are way more wealthy than they would ever have dreamed. They've had the opportunities, they've been in business, set up a business, put their kids through university. We took courses that they probably didn't like or didn't approve of, but never mind. And their children have reached goals that they would never have ever dreamed of. I worry though that if they had come here, instead of coming here 70 years ago, if they had come here, say, sort of half a century later, if they'd come here 50 years ago, I'm not quite sure that they would have reached that wealth in any way, and I'm pretty sure that they would have had lots of difficulty sending their children through to the levels that I have been privileged enough to achieve. And so I think the element that I'd focus on in the title when we're talking about a wealthy future for all, I'm not sure we've got problems with the wealthy word in that topic. It's the last two words that I'd focus on. It's the for all that we here in Aotearoa in the 21st century have the most difficulty with. I would say, and I worry, and I don't want to go dark, but I think we have to be honest with ourselves. I'm not sure we have an appetite for the for all. One of the challenges, I think, is do we have an appetite as individuals and a community to honestly take up that for all conversation. We can all argue about wealthy and whether it's the finances or the opportunities or the education or the health and all of those sorts of things. But it's the for all thing. When, and I'm not a philosopher, but when in our history over the last sort of 30, 40, 50 years have we lost that? I wouldn't say we've lost, but probably subsumed that egalitarian ideal that, dare I say, my parents came here for. Because I think that's the thing that's missing. I don't say it's missing, I think it's still there. I'm an optimist. But somehow we need to resurface it because we get diverted, and I'll go into it probably in that second conversation. But the challenge is very much for us to look at wealthy, look at wealth from that broad definition, and then look at the full all. The broad definition of wealth, and yes, all of those things are helped by having access to dollars, absolutely. And that's part of the conversation, and happy to go down there. But even if we do go down the dollars route, it's the for all that's the issue, in my opinion. And as an economist, I think one of the biggest challenges for the economics discipline and economists and the way that we all look at the economy is that for all. We're very good at, and this was part of when I learned economics way back here, way back whenever, and partly from my parents a long time ago, and they're very, I suppose, I won't call it primitive, but very low understanding of what the economy meant. Basically, it was just growing the pie. And we wouldn't have to worry about how it was divided up, because back then, as long as we grew the pie, we all sort of shared in it. And that was my father's philosophy, and I sort of took that on board, and as an economist, it was all focused on growing the pie. I think now as economists and in our economics conversations, we've got to talk a lot more about the for all. How do we divide up that pie? Because I know as an economist, in terms of my training, we're sort of a little bit allergic to that conversation. We don't like talking about distribution stuff because that's for someone else to talk about. That's not real economics. Economics is just, we just do our employment and give everybody opportunities and make sure they've got dollars, and then someone else can sort it out about the distribution of it. But unfortunately, well, we'll get to that second part. But I think we've now got to start talking about that distribution element a lot more openly. Let's talk about that egalitarian values that most of us, I think, hold dear, but unfortunately it's been subsumed, and we've got to be a bit more honest and open to, actually, yeah, it is part of my value set, and I actually do want to put it in that policy analysis out there. And when we're talking about distribution from an economist's perspective, I think the elephant is in the room that we've got to talk openly about is tax. And that's where I'm headed.
Nice segue.
Very good segue.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you from me as well for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I am going to pick up on a couple of things that Ganesh has said, because they do sort of link to, I guess, my perspectives as well. Ganesh, you said you didn't want to go dark. I probably am going to. I think the minute I hear the word wealth, I'm instantly thinking wealth inequality. And we all, I'm sure everybody in this room has heard the 10% of households in New Zealand hold 50% of the wealth, or 5% of households have 37% of the wealth, or bottom 10% have virtually nothing. And whenever I teach, I always make sure that all of my students get inequality in some way or another, because it's so important. And one of the things I always tell them is, when we're looking at wealth inequality, there is such an enormous gap in New Zealand. So income inequality is not so bad. Wealth inequality is highly problematic. And I tell them that the top quintile, so the top 20% of households in New Zealand, have 184 times the amount of wealth as the bottom quintile. 184 times. I don't think this is in any way an acceptable level of inequality in a country that, as Ganesh has said, used to be very egalitarian. Now, I went back, as part of my preparation for this, I went back to, not quite as far as you, but to the 1972, there was a Royal Commission. It was a Royal Commission on Social Security. And one of the things that I really liked about this particular Royal Commission was they were very clear about what what we as a society wanted. Now, the focus was at that time on the benefit system because it was a time when benefit numbers were increasing. But actually, it was also more of a discussion about what we as a society wanted for everyone. And where they settled, I thought was actually pretty good. They settled on belonging and participating. That was an acceptable standard. And that was defined as everybody being able to meet and mix with other New Zealanders as a full member of the community. It's a pretty okay standard. It's not probably what a lot of people might think of as wealthy, but it's a good standard to aim for. Now, at that time, what was inadequate, it was described as inadequate, was subsistence. That was maintaining life and health to have access to the essentials of life. Now, we're there now. We're at subsistence. I think a lot of people are not even at subsistence. So, how did we move from a standard that I think society was largely in agreement with, which is people being able to belong and participate in society? How did we move from there to subsistence? And subsistence only for some. So I would say one of the things that, and it's probably fairly self-obvious, but if we're looking at a wealthy future for all, we have to be thinking about tackling that wealth inequality. So the other thing I went and looked at, and again, it continues from what Ganesh has said, is I've been looking at the transfer system. So, so tax is what we collect, the transfer system is what we spend. And specifically, I went and looked at this year's budget for next year, but on all the additional expenditure that we have. I'm not talking about the benefit system, so I'm not talking about the sole parent support or the job seekers, not that. It's the additional expenditure that we are making and keeping people at that subsistence level. So it was 8.5 billion in working for families tax credits and various sorts of accommodation assistance and so on. So this is something that we didn't have 30 years ago, 40 years ago. We didn't need to have this enormous level of transfers from people who are, for the most part, working, but actually are still unable to, well, certainly they're not belonging and participating, they're needing an enormous amount of government support to be at that subsistence level. So these numbers, the additional transfers, these are increasing very, very quickly, 50% in the last 7-8 years or so. And there's no suggestion that this particular trajectory is going to decline in any way. So how it really manifests itself, so we had that really nice high wealth individual report from Inland Revenue and Treasury last year. We know that the most wealthy are paying lower levels of tax than your average income earner. So what we're seeing transfers from middle income New Zealand to lower income New Zealand, essentially keeping all of those groups down, where you've got a group at the top who are not contributing to the same extent, and our inequality gap is getting larger and larger. I might leave that there and pass on to Murray.
Thank you, Lisa. Morena tātou, good morning. Sounds like fun. Okay. And thank you, Jane, for the invitation to be here. I was thinking the last time I studied here was 41 years ago. So, and Susan and I studied together 41 years ago here. We were here up the hill like Ganesh was. It's lovely to be here this morning. I have the privilege of working with some of the people who are doing life toughest in Wellington. They probably won't ever come here. But it's a really interesting thing, and to pick up on Ganesh's point, I see how hard their lives are, but every night I get in my car and I drive home, and I go home to a warm house and a meal. And these people never leave their circumstances. So that should be a problem. It should be a problem for all of us. I saw an article a few weeks ago, and it basically said, if scientists found a monkey that existed in a tribe of monkeys who gathered all the bananas together and sat on them while other monkeys starved, they would take him out of the group and they would study him as being a freak of nature. When humans do it, we celebrate them and we acknowledge them, we put them on the cover of magazines. So what is it that we've got wrong in this, that individual wealth versus collective wealth is the thing that's so important? 5 years ago, my wife and I travelled to Brazil. We were going to the wedding of a young man who had been a student with us when he was 17. And 17 years later, when he was 34, he got married. And we went and we stayed with his family for a week in Campo Grande in Brazil. Lovely, lovely people. They were lawyers and they lived in the most beautiful house. So we got to stay in this house for a week. And they had servants and they had the most amazing outdoor area with a pool. And it was like paradise, a beautiful, beautiful house. But there was a problem. It was surrounded by a concrete wall that was 4 metres high. And they had razor wire on top of the wall, and they had lights and they had cameras, and they had a steel gate you had to drive through to get into the house. Because they were afraid of their neighbourhood. And we got into a conversation about what life was like in New Zealand. And they couldn't believe that we didn't have walls around our homes. Because how do you even live like that? And my comment was, look, when we fence our homes, it's to keep the dogs and the kids in, not other people out. And that was a foreign concept for them. We don't want to live like that. And it struck me at the time, is this what wealth looks like? Because wealth in a microcosm of that, in a community that is difficult to engage in and connect in and people are scared, that doesn't feel like a wealthy environment. So this idea of how do we think about, and we've all talked about it this morning, about what do people absolutely need. And when you're talking about the 1970s, it brought to mind as a 12-year-old standing on the street down here in Lambton Quay in 1974, I think it was, with an elderly relative, watching the funeral procession of Norman Kirk drive past. And Norman Kirk said something very significant. He said, people don't need much, just somewhere to live, something to do, someone to love, and something to look forward to. Doesn't sound like a high threshold, and yet so many of the people in our community today don't have those things. Because I get to see that every day, and I see it as a great privilege. And I say to people, when you sit with people who are doing life really, really hard, and some of you will, and Ganesh comes and volunteers for the Wellington City Missioner, and so he gets to see some of this. It does feel like a real privilege, because remarkably they look like you and I. And they have a backstory like you and I have. It's just that something's happened in the context of their life or their journey that's put them on a different trajectory than perhaps some of us. So what do we do about that? Is that our responsibility? Well, I happen to think that it is. Because I think if we're serious about being both healthy and wealthy and potentially wise, then we need to be in a community where we make sure that everybody has at least enough. And so many of the people I work with have virtually nothing. One of the things I say often these days is that people don't become homeless because they run out of money. They become homeless because they run out of relationships. Why do they run out of relationships? Primarily because of mental health and addiction issues. And we see that so evident in our community. But often again, economics start to drive some of the differential. So we've opened in Taranaki Street earlier this year a residential alcohol harm reduction service. Everyone else calls it a wet house. I won't call it that. Where people can come and live and drink on site. Why? Because they need the alcohol to keep them alive. They're alcoholics. And if they don't have that place to go to, there is nowhere they can go. Now, there are lots of highly functioning alcoholics in our community. The difference between them and the people I have there is their ability to resource their own existence. And so it becomes an economic discussion as well. So it is really thinking about how do we bridge the gap and how do we make that difference happen. We're about to open a brand new building in 5 weeks' time from yesterday, the date of your WISE event, so I probably won't come. And it's called Whakamaru, and its purpose is to create a community where there's no us and them. Now that's not easy to do. And the idea is to facilitate the community learning how to care for itself. The interesting thing about that project though, and I started it nearly 6 years ago, is it started as a project with a budget of $5 million. My economics and accounting training really hasn't worked that well, because when we opened it on the 30th of October, it would have cost $50 million. So I should have been sacked by now. And I do intend at that time, when I open it on the 30th of October, to open it without debt. And we're nearly there. You might have seen Ashley Bloomfield hanging off a billboard on the weekend. That's all part of the campaign to try and fund this building. Because if we can open it without debt, then all future earnings and revenue goes directly into service delivery. And we're going to get there largely because of the generosity of individuals. And about 40% of the money for that building will come from central government. The vast majority comes from individuals in our community. Many of them very high net worth individuals. And I'm not a fundraiser, I don't ask for money. My job is to enlist people in a vision. But it's about creating the connection between people that have something and people that need something, and how do we make that connection work? And I think at the end of the day, that's what this conversation is all about. How do we ensure that everyone in our community has enough? I'm not talking about everyone being equal, because people won't be equal. I always talk about equity and fairness, because they're the things that define how good we are.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for really great perspectives. We will, so we've had everything from what is wealthy, how do we do the distribution, the for all bit, the wealth inequality, and how do we ensure people have enough. So we'll move to our second question, which is, what is essential to address these challenges? Ganesh, we'll start with you again.
I think the critical thing for me is well, cutting to the chase, how do we get here? I'm an economist. It was our implementation of an economic philosophy that did prioritise individuals over community. Let's be honest about it. It hasn't delivered that economic model and that economic policy and that economic philosophy. Again, we have to be open about that, rather than still got policy implementation that doesn't accept that fundamental. You talk about evidence and data. Doesn't accept that fundamental. Still thinks it can deliver as long as we tweak a little bit at the margins. And I think the fundamental challenge that we've got to get to is dare I say it, is the economics discipline and the economists around the room and around this institution and around Wellington, because they do the economic analysis, they do the policy analysis. All the interventions to justify government intervention or any intervention in the economy is driven by this model that puts individuals above community. It puts individual choice above community choice. We've still got a whole lot of policy analysis tools that are basically targeted at increasing the size of the pie, not really interested in how we divide up the pie. And so, without getting too technical, well, I will get technical. We've got in the economics literature Pareto optimality, and we're not allowed to intervene unless we've got a Pareto improvement. And that basically means you can't take anything away from me unless, you can't intervene with taking anything away from me. You can intervene as long as someone else is getting better, but no one else is allowed to get worse. So that means $1 taken away from me is as bad as $1 taken away from one of the clients that go to the social supermarket. There's an equality there that doesn't gel, but that's the economics we get taught. So we've actually got to, as economists, get away from our allergy to redistribution. Our allergic response to any tax intervention is, okay, you can't go into tax unless you can prove that this redistribution is going to leave someone better off but no one worse off. It assumes the current situation is okay. That's our policy analysis that is still being implemented, whether it's tax, or whether it's welfare, or whether it's, dare I say, buying inter-islander ferries. It's going to make, Anyway, so that's one of the first things, is economists got to get past their allergy to distribution impacts. And the other conversation, similarly with when I was on the WEAG and Welfare Expert Advisory Group, and which was, I suppose, the subsequent one from the 72 Royal Commission on Social Policy, we talked about adequate income, and we measured those sorts of adequate incomes. We put a number out there. Let's continue to measure that. But part of that is, let's reclaim our egalitarian values, and let's get out of this punitive perspective on beneficiaries. They haven't done anything wrong. Why do we consider that it's okay to force beneficiaries into taking up work, actually punish them if they don't take up work, when we've got another arm of government actively putting people out of work? And I can give you the economic theories about why that's okay, but actually there's something wrong with those economic theories. Because it assumes, all those economic theories, it assumes the current situation is okay, and all we've got to do is progress from that. The other survey I put is, why are all economics departments and all the universities in New Zealand parts of the School of Business? Sorry, I just put it out there. Why is economics whatever it is, a subset of business? Isn't it the other way round? Economics is way broader than business, but unfortunately business has captured economics, and that's how we get this policy analysis which puts individual choice above community choice. My choice to be able to choose between 27 different brands of toothpaste on the supermarket shelf is way more important than the choice of a person having to choose between putting food on the table or going to the dentist. Those two choices are equivalent in the economic theory. And because I can afford my choice, I take priority. So there's something about the economics discipline that we've got to get really right, because that drives our policy choices. And that discipline, I know I'm part of that discipline, has a lot to answer for. So we've got to have some courage in our economics. And there are some economists, there are quite a few, especially outside of New Zealand, who have captured the new thinking or different thinking. I just encourage that even more. It's one of the challenges if we're serious about the for all bit.
Kia ora, Ganesh. To be honest with you, Ganesh, when you started questioning the position of economics, I thought you were going to say that it belonged to political science. So,
That's a good
I'm sort of poking you a little bit there.
No, that's good one to have.
Because I often feel actually like this with tax, it's so political that actually, it's very hard to separate the politics from the actual discussion that we really should be having. So bear with me one moment. I am going to talk to you about tax because I was going to say tax didn't create this issue. Might not have solely created it, certainly contributed to it, and it definitely exacerbates it. So we have three
Tax and a light side.
yeah, I'm sure that was intentional. So there are three ways of taxing at a very simple level. We can tax income, which we do really well in New Zealand. We can tax something called consumption, which is everything that you buy. And again, we do that incredibly well in New Zealand. The third arm is wealth. And that's what we don't do. There are things at the margins, yes, the odd transaction that will get picked up, but for the most part, we don't tax wealth, and we certainly don't tax it comprehensively like most other jurisdictions do. I have no particularly strong preference as to whether that is a capital gains tax or a land tax or an inheritance tax or a wealth tax. We just need something which is going to tax wealth, because this is going to be one way that we can actively start redistribution. And instead of redistribution from the middle to the bottom, it will be a broader redistribution from the top. Yes, we do hear from those who have wealth that they will leave the country if we introduce a wealth tax. Well, good luck finding another place that's not going to tax that wealth, because we're really one of the last few standing that doesn't do this. And then I would ask, why don't we do this? There is, to my mind, no good reason for not taxing wealth. I'm yet to see anything, or be convinced, or even hear anything that actually suggests that our policy in New Zealand, as far as not taxing wealth, is the right way to go. Instead, as you probably have gathered, I think it is completely the wrong direction. So I'd start there. I would also point the finger at some of our regulatory systems. I look to the influence that industry has in New Zealand, and I think, why are we so concerned, rhetorical question, why are we so concerned with keeping industry happy while we are a lot less concerned with those who have very little? And we're being recorded, so I'm actually not going to call out the industries that we all know who I'm talking about. But, well, actually, let's point to one that we all know about. We as taxpayers are now essentially subsidising the tobacco industry. And I can't believe that most of us signed up for that. Yeah, completely. Ganesh, you made the really good point. Business has captured economics, and I think that's absolutely right. We are very much, as a society, focused on, our governments are focused on keeping business happy, and actually what that does is, in that mix, we lose sight of the people in our societies and our communities, who I actually think we probably should be more focused on. The other point that I was just reflecting on is organisation. Businesses as industries seem to be able to organise themselves very, very well, and the lobbying that we see now is pretty significant, and it seems to be working. So I would question why we can't do that as a collective to try to get better outcomes for some of the people in society who are not represented by big business and business interests. Actually, let me just say one other thing. Answering the question now, what would address those challenges? I would actually also say education. So education, I know, is not for everyone. I'm not saying that it is, but the OECD have a figure along the lines of 50% of improvements in society over the last 50 years can be directly attributed to education. And I would like to see tertiary education being more available, other education being more available. I'd like to see us pushing for no fees, not just fees free at the end, so that we're opening these opportunities for people like we had 30 years ago, when you didn't have to make a choice about taking a job or going to university, because you would probably walk out with an enormous student debt that you would spend your next 5 years of work paying off. So I feel that those are some choices we are putting on our younger people that are not choices maybe that current generations had to make. I will pass back to Murray. Thanks, Murray.
Thank you, Lisa. And to comment on a couple of Lisa's points, I also support the commitment to education, because education will be the thing that starts to change the trajectory of people's outcomes. And as far as the wealth tax goes, that's also an area that I'm really interested in. Radio New Zealand have been doing a series recently on wealth and wealth taxes, and interestingly enough, they interviewed some of New Zealand's highest net worth individuals last week. almost exclusively they said they would be comfortable with a wealth tax, but they didn't trust the government to spend it. Really interesting concept. My single largest donor to my building project has given me $8 million. They are a very high net worth individual, but why have they given us money? Because they trust us to spend it well, and they believe in what we're going to do with it. So that's a really important connection between, taxation and connection into resource and how it's subsequently used. For me, the biggest single issue that I always talk about relates to housing. Housing is the thing that drives most of the disadvantage I see in the community at the moment. And often it's just the cost of housing. And we're not talking about home ownership, we're talking about the cost of tenancies and leasing and rental properties. And I have many of the people we deal with are paying in excess of 60 to 70% of their disposable income on their housing costs. And if that's the case, they will not survive, they will not have enough to live on. There was a Wellington City Council report done on housing, and it came up with 3 conclusions. That there wasn't enough, so it wasn't accessible enough. The stock quality was insufficient, so the quality of our housing wasn't good enough. And thirdly, it was too expensive. And that sounds like a reasonable summary of what we all know about the housing market. The report was written in 1906. Some things haven't changed, and yet we're in a situation at the moment where life is tougher, I suspect, for most people than it's ever been. And we're getting senses that people now in our community, and it's the first time I've heard this in my 20 years in social services, is that people are becoming hopeless. So when people can't see out of their current circumstances and they lose hope, that's a really difficult and dangerous place for us as a community to be in. And every week the media ring me up and ask me to comment on the cost of living. The reality is the answer is always the same, that we can talk about supermarket prices and we can talk about the cost of fuel, but if you don't deal with the cost of housing, then it's all just trivia and detail. But there is some hope, I think, and the hope comes for me from a couple of places that I'll comment on today. The first is I had the privilege a few weeks ago to sit on the interview panel with PSC for the new chief executive of the Social Investment Agency, which got announced on Wednesday this week, yesterday or the day before. Andrew Costa, the current police commissioner, has become the new chief executive of the Social Investment Agency. That vehicle has the potential to change government, I think, because his job is to ensure that money is spent where it makes the most difference, and his job is to corral his colleagues together, the public service chief executives, and ensure that they fund and operate in a way that reflects social investment outcomes. That's a very good thing. But the final thing, I think, and it comes down to us and how we respond to our community. And the thing that's made the single largest difference in the Wellington City Mission over the last 6 years is the commitment we made that we would treat every person who came in our door with dignity and with respect and without judgment. So my whole strategic plan for the Wellington City Mission is wrapped up in those 3 concepts: dignity, respect, and treating people without judgment. Because when you put that as a strategic filter over everything you do and say, is this the most dignified, the most respectful, the least judgmental way we can do this? And if it's not, let's make it so. It changes the way you relate to your community and to the activities you do. And if we as a community can adopt something similar in thinking about those concepts, and it may be as simple as when you walk past someone who's sitting on the street, people keep asking me, should I give them money? It's the wrong question. What I encourage you to do is make eye contact and say hello, how's your day going? Because you'd say that to anybody else. You can choose whether you give them money or not, that's a different conversation. The idea that we create dignity as we engage together properly. I'm going to pause there.
Thank you all, that's great. So I feel like we should immediately collectivise, walk across to the beehive, demand that wealth is taxed in some form.
And then come out and hang out with me for the day.
Yeah. Come and hang out with Murray for the day. support the Social Investment Agency and lobby it, and well, I suppose internally within the university we can maybe challenge our economists on their paradigms.
Exactly.
But first of all, we'll open it up for discussion, because I'm sure many of you may have questions or comments that you would like to pose to any or all. So we'll start over there and then on there and then
Kia ora. My name is Ganesh Nana. I'm here more from non-profit community, representing a couple of organizations. But thank you to all the panelists, really good talk. I have a couple of questions related to the overall talk. First is, thank you Ganesh, you shared the fact that your parents came 70 years ago, and if they would have come 20 years ago, things would have been different. I fall in the same category, not 20, more than 20, but the reason is that if you look at immigration of this country, the intake is always more than what is required here. Maybe New Zealand is, Aotearoa is sitting on a privilege that immigrants can be recycled and then they'll go to Australia. I know it's hard, but I would call it immigration corruption. Secondly, if we come to taxation, CGT has been flogged to death. There are pros, there are cons, so it can be implemented, it should not be implemented. But when there is housing problem in New Zealand, and not introducing any tax at housing at all, is it not housing corruption? And I'll go to the third example, like banana and monkey. When we celebrate those things on the covers of the magazines, is it not corruption? Why we are tiptoeing around this word and not calling it corruption? That's my question. And if you look at, there's a fact here that smoking is subsidized, and tobacco industry is being subsidized. We need to change the perception. I grew up as a child watching too much American TV, where even doctors were shown enjoying smoking, sports people were shown enjoying smoking, but then the perception changed, and everybody went against smoking. So why it is so hard to say that New Zealand is a policy corrupt country? We go home, maybe a good meal, sleeping, good bed, but this policy corruption is draining our pocket. So why aren't we identifying corruption? Thank you.
I suppose, I'm not sure I totally agree with all of your comments, but I get where you're coming from. I think I'm not sure it's that helpful to go down the corruption route. I prefer to be the optimist and talk about the community that we want to build and the Aotearoa that we want to build or leave for our mokopuna. And I think that's the focus of the policy that we need to implement. And so for the immigration inquiry and the immigration topic, are we comfortable as a nation leaving a legacy where it's okay for some employers to exploit migrants? Because that's what we've enabled by not having a labour inspectorate that's fully funded. It's really that simple. I think the tax element, and with all due respect, Lisa, we can continue talking about tax forever. We're not going to get there until we get a widespread acceptance in our community that tax is okay. There is nothing wrong with tax. Tax is not taking away things from you. It's actually enabling us as a community to deliver something for everybody. And I go back to that economics analysis. The problem we don't get tax is because we've got economists have an inbuilt allergy to tax, because there's this thing called a dead weight loss that we're told in with stage 1 economics. I remember learning about the dead weight loss. The moment any government comes in and taxes something, there's a dead weight loss. So tax is bad. Until we redefine or re-look at that model and start talking about tax as what it can enable, we're never going to get or make progress, or maybe until we do that, that's when we make progress on the different forms of tax. So yes, I fully understand there are elements of New Zealand that is corrupt. We like to think of ourselves as not. But pointing that out, yes, but alongside a vision for the future that's a lot more positive, and to give our children hope, because I think that's what we've got to do.
I'm just going to make a quick point about corruption in general, not so much about immigration, but our government agencies that are tasked with looking for corruption. So I'm thinking, Inland Revenue, Serious Fraud Office, Financial Markets Authority, Commerce Commission, you name it. They are seriously under-resourced. Yeah. I mean, we may not find an awful lot of corruption. It's because we're not resourced to actually go and find it. It is there. So I think your point in that respect is well made. I might just pass on to Murray for...
No, I'm not sure I've got anything to say about corruption.
Okay, so
we talk about wealth in New Zealand. I'm thinking of immigration. There are people that come to New Zealand for better employment opportunity. During the 80s, many Kiwi left New Zealand for other countries, and there was a shortage of IT staff. So foreigners came to New Zealand to work as computer programmer or system analyst and all that. Work permit will apply, and some stay to continue to work and apply for permanent resident. And some of these overseas IT staff have become New Zealander. So I think foreigners do contribute to New Zealand economic growth, and also for investment, like business investment in New Zealand create jobs, bring revenue to the government, and benefit everyone here. But I look at it this way, New Zealand is a wealthy country, but we also respond to the call of humanitarian, like the church and the government do take in refugees from war zone, and the church help the refugee to settle in New Zealand. So I'm trying to say, yes, New Zealanders are rich. We also care for the world. That's my opinion.
any questions or comments? Len.
Kia ora tātou. I must admit, from Lisa's comment and the others, the sense of we're back with Macmillan, Lord Mayor, Davidson and Kura. And also, of course, we have to remember the Royal Commission on Social Security in a way distilled that thinking. And we saw that right through until the mid-80s. And I think there are two critical things that are important there. Is that sense of participation meant we had universality in our benefits, health, education, housing. From the 1980s, we've had school deciles, we've had targeting of virtually every benefit that we can, we've had public servants who have become gatekeepers of the lives of individuals in a way that they weren't. And it seems that, the last shift from targeting to universality, ironically, was Muldoon when he got rid of the old age pension and said everyone will get national super. And since it, and I think the one thing I say, what I think is important is that welfare state was created by men and women that went through a depression and a Second World War. So the generation before me believed that they had an obligation to change the world. Now my generation, I was a post-war baby boom, early post-war baby boom, a little older than even Murray, I think. We've actually acted more like plumbers in the social system and infrastructure that's been created. And I think that's partly because people like Ganesh, who had a lot of data, I helped give it to him, and we sort of judged the world in a really mechanistic way. And I wonder whether our real hope for the future is the generation that's coming through now that knows that its life chances are going to be less than that of their parents and grandparents. And I think one of our real obligations is to make sure that that generation has the capacity, if we're really long-term thinkers, to really change and see things. But I think we have to come back to my generation. Many of them politicians describe my predecessors as grey, singleted, grey jerseyed people who had no understanding of the world. And yet they're the ones that brought in this sense of change. So I just wonder, what are we going to do to bring that back? You're the people at the front up there.
I'll ask a question that answers that. There was a lot of talk about the community and things like that. We actually have organisations that will deal with these things. They're called trade unions. Some of you may remember them.
Didn't we outlaw?
And effective trade unions deal with lots of these problems. They monitor workforces, they deal with problems like exploitation, but they need obviously the powers to do so. And since 1991, of course, we haven't had that. And the other thing I'd add to that, the OECD, which used to be sort of nice and neoliberal, has finally worked out that effective trade unions are one of the keys to most of the problems going on economically and socially. And the easiest way to sort a lot of these problems out is to reinvigorate unions.
Comment from the panel?
I think the other piece of hope around community organisations or institutions is to look at the structures within Te Ao Māori in terms of long-term thinking and in terms of community more important than individual. Now, I'm not saying Māori is any better or worse than Pākehā, but I think that bringing those values to the fore again, and yes, reinvigorate unions. I think that the element is to reshape our thinking back to what are our values. If you're talking about an economist, what is the objective of the economy? Should be embedding those values, and in my opinion, the objective is leaving a legacy for our future generations that we have lost sight of, because the current objective of the economy that we've assumed is just delivering more and more to all of us, or delivering more and more to some of us, I should say.
I wouldn't normally comment on unions, but I will say that everybody is deserving of someone going into bat for them.
Yeah.
And for those who don't have support, that's really important. Now, whether that's a union or some other mechanism. Can I comment on Men's observation? I think we have a generation of young people coming through who are quite extraordinary. They can do things that you and I wouldn't have even been able to envisage doing. I interviewed a young person, well, they were early 30s, so I think they're a young person, the other day, and I wish I was that bright when I was 30. It was just, there's remarkable ways of thinking, and they have tool sets that you and I never had. So this place in particular has a huge responsibility and potential to create something really significant. Because when I get groups of young people together, and they're pretty scary when they're all together, they can do almost anything, and the things that are obstacles and barriers for people like me just don't seem to exist with our young people. So I completely support En's call. We should be backing our next generation in any way that we can.
Aotearoa, Helen Rook, I'm the current Dean of the Faculty of Health, but I'm a registered nurse of over 30 years. One of the things that I've seen both in my clinical and academic career is that human beings are inherently selfish on one hand, and are also inherently built for compassion and selflessness. And so to balance those things out, it's quite tricky. And I listened to somebody questioning the Dalai Lama recently about, you're all about self-compassion, and yet you're still sitting in isolation. The Chinese still have control over your territory. What has self-compassion done for you, because you sit there alone? And he answered that really wisely, and said that the first place that we have to start is about self-compassion towards ourselves. And if we do that, and we inherently look internally, we have the ability to look outward and to change the world slowly and gradually. what the question that I have is about who is writing the new economic policies and theories, because I'd like to talk to them, really, because if we're not doing that, I don't know, I don't understand, I do understand a little bit about economic theory, but I'm not an economist. I'm a person who works alongside other human beings to help them. So I want to know who's writing the new economic theories, and maybe we could start teaching those to people.
Can I make a comment and then someone will give you a sensible answer? Firstly, can I acknowledge you as a registered nurse? My 3 most senior staff in the mission are all registered nurses, and they have convinced me that registered nurses can do anything.
I agree.
So, you made a comment about selfishness. As a general observation, and there will always be exceptions, I think generosity and selfishness are inversely in relation to wealth. I think people who have more tend to share less. And if you don't believe that, come and sit in one of my services and you'll find people who are the most generous, the most giving, who don't have anything pretty much, but they will give you something of what they have. And we've constantly got to be reminded about this, because when someone gives you $1 million gift, it's a big celebration. When someone gives you $10, it's probably a larger proportion of their wealth than the $1 million you got. And we've got to be cognizant of that. But someone's going to give you a decent answer.
Well, I'm going to hand over to Ganesh for the decent answer, but one that springs to mind is Thomas Piketty. So I think he has done my view of economics, a bit of a favour. He's the one that has really introduced us to the idea that returns to wealth are greater than returns to income, and it provides a strong justification for taxing wealth instead of taxing income. But Ganesh will explain that better.
Sure. Well, Piketty has done a lot of that recently, that work on redistribution, or the distribution and the historical changes for quite a long and that's the international perspective. I think the other 2 economists that I would always talk about is Mariana Mazzucato, who's been talking about active government in terms of mission-based economies, so we don't focus on industries, and so what would be the mission for us to set, so what's the North Star, so it's not GDP growth, it's the example from history was we were going to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade, and that was the mission, and all economic activity was focused on bringing together that. So the mission now, I'd say, is how do we build a New Zealand with no petrol stations by 2035? Full stop. We're not allowed to sell petrol in 2035 afterwards, so that would be the mission, so all of the industry activity and bringing in new stuff. So that's the policy settings for that, or the policy questions and responses. And the other person I would talk to, and bring in Kate Raworth, Professor Kate Raworth. If some of you may have heard about the donut economy model. To me, some economists are very, challenged by that model because it's something totally new. Well, actually, it's not that totally new. It's basically just economic activity is bounded by constraints. There's a floor, a social floor, and there's a planetary boundary ceiling. And you can't go outside of over those 2. Those are your flaws in economics within constraints. I mean, it's what I was taught in stage 1 economics. Maximising profitability subject to constraints. It's not new. It's just the constraints are different. The social floor is quite a conversation to have. One of the elements of the social floor would be an adequate income. Another part of the social floor is a right to shelter. We can all argue about it, and economists will talk about dead weight loss, but those are the rules that an economy needs to operate under. We need to start thinking about a model that's going to work with those rules.
Any final questions or comments? There you go. Last one.
Yeah, thank you everyone. That's really, really amazing. I guess picking up on a lot of the comments and what you've said, how do you think you can change things, especially when, if you think about, I guess, an economy today, an economy for the next generation is probably even more reliant on the kind of, however you do it, community, collectively supplied opportunities like health and education and science and technology that's not individually provided. How can you sort of maximise those opportunities for everyone in the future?
I think the first thing is to recognise that we've changed a lot over history. So again, let's not get allergic to change, and let's not try and pretend that the economy we've got today is going to continue forever. It needs to change. The economic model needs to change. The business models need to change. We just need to respond. We used to have a business model where it was perfectly okay to send kids down a coal mine. That were the rules that business operates within, the rules that we give them. So the new rules are A, B, C and D. I think, how do you do it? And we've got to maintain that long-term horizon. And what is the North Star that we're heading towards? We've got no sense of that North Star at the moment. And it may sound academic and it may sound all fluffy and all, the strategic direction and all of that sort of stuff. But at the moment, we've got an economy that is just chugging along, pretending that all of the stuff out there is not relevant to it. We'll just carry on doing what we've always done. Well, give it a new North Star and give it some more rules, or new rules that it's got to operate in. By the way, we're going to tax you. And don't complain because we're going to deliver stuff. That's the... So, I don't know, the other thing is we need leadership, which is, scary, but change always is scary. But,
We know that ecosystems go in cycles, and often the example that's used is the idea of a forest that burns, and then the stuff that burns forms the basis for new growth. To pick up Ben's earlier point, I think as a generation we've failed. I think we should have real hope for the next generation. So maybe we've been the time of the burning and the destruction and the breakdown, and actually there's renewal coming. I hope so. And certainly when I look at my children and my grandchildren, they're going to be better humans than I am, I'm sure. And so we should maintain the hope in that, because it can't be broken, because otherwise we've got a very difficult path ahead.
Okay, well, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to Ganesh, Lisa and Murray for really thought-provoking commentary on the challenges that face us to get to a fairer and wealthier future for all. Lots of food for thought from this morning, and I hope we can bring some of the threads through to our third session on getting to a wiser future for all. I'm happy to think about ways that we can continue the conversation next year, kicking off with another Dean series, because I just think the things that are being brought up are so rich, and I hope that we can galvanise some action at some point out the other end to begin changing things. Maybe we can bring together some of our economists and start interrogating economic models.
I'll need some friends on.
So anyway, can we show our appreciation to